No light had ever crossed Ashfall's water after midnight, until the night the sea carried a king to her shore. Evelyn Carter stood barefoot at the edge of the black sand, one hand wrapped around the handle of her lantern, the other pressed against the silver pendant beneath her wool sweater. The wind came hard from the east, carrying salt, rain, and the sharp metallic scent of a storm gathering beyond the cliffs. For 10 years, the island had belonged to her alone. 10 years of waking before dawn to check her rain barrels. 10 years of setting fishing lines along the southern cove. 10 years of knowing every safe trail through the cedar woods and every place where the ground gave way beneath the moss. She knew the sound of gulls fighting over shellfish. She knew the low whistle the tide made when it passed through the sea caves. She knew how silence settled over Ashfall when danger was near. Tonight, silence had left. Far beyond the breakers, a single gold light moved across the water. Evelyn narrowed her gray-blue eyes. At first, she thought it was lightning caught in the clouds. Then the light held steady. It rose and dipped with the waves, too warm and deliberate to be a star. A ship. Her breath stopped. No ship had come close to Ashfall since the morning they left her here. She had been 14, thin from fever and fear, standing on the deck of a government vessel while Chancellor Grant Holloway told her the island would keep everyone safe from her. He had called her scent dangerous. He had said her Omega nature could stir unrest among the packs. He had never looked at her again after the sailors pushed the rowboat toward shore. Evelyn had spent years waiting for someone to return. Then she had spent even more years teaching herself not to. The golden light drifted closer. She could make out the dark shape of a vessel fighting the rough water, its mast leaning beneath the storm clouds. It was larger than the fishing boats that sometimes passed far out at sea. A silver banner snapped above it, barely visible in the rain. Evelyn knew that emblem. Every child in the kingdom knew it. A wolf beneath a crescent moon. Royal colors. Her fingers tightened around the lantern. The island had been marked forbidden on every map she had ever seen. Royal ships did not come here by accident. A wave crashed against the rocks below, sending cold spray across her ankles. Evelyn turned from the shore and moved quickly toward the line of cedar trees. Her cabin sat nearly half a mile inland, hidden beneath a ridge where the wind could not reach it. She had built it herself from driftwood, fallen timber, and patience. Inside were 3 days of clean water, dried fish, a jar of honey, a small medical kit, and the narrow trapdoor beneath the kitchen table that led to a hidden path through the roots of an old oak. She knew exactly what to do when strangers arrived. She had practiced it in her mind 100 times. But as she reached the first trees, the pendant beneath her sweater grew warm against her skin. Evelyn stopped. The storm pressed around her. From the sea came the groan of wood, the crack of a sail in the wind, and then a scent that did not belong to salt or rain. Cedarwood, smoke, cold mountain air, alpha, strong enough to make the back of her neck prickle, yet strangely familiar, like a memory she had never lived. Evelyn looked over her shoulder. The royal ship had vanished behind a curtain of rain. Only the golden light remained, flickering near the rocks. Then, through the wind, she heard a man call out from the darkness. Not a command, not a threat, just one word, carried across 10 years of solitude. Evelyn. Evelyn did not answer. The sound of her name seemed to hang between the cedar trunks, too clear to be carried by wind and too impossible to be real. She lifted the lantern higher, but its small flame only showed wet needles, twisted roots, and rain sliding down the dark bark. No one on Ashfall should have known her name. Not the fishermen who avoided the island. Not the sailors who marked it as cursed on their maps. Not the officials who had left her here and never once returned to see whether she had survived. Her first instinct was not fear. It was movement. Evelyn turned toward her cabin and ran. She knew the ground, even in darkness. She stepped over the low ridge of stone, cut between 2 leaning cedars, and followed the narrow path where ferns brushed against her knees. Rain soaked her hair and sweater within seconds, but she kept the lantern close to her chest. Behind her, the sea roared against the cliffs. She listened for footsteps. There were none. That was worse. By the time the cabin came into view, her breathing had settled into the steady rhythm she had taught herself during storms. The cabin was small, built against the shelter of a rocky hill. Its roof was patched with cedar shingles. A row of rain barrels stood beneath the eaves. A small garden lay sleeping under the downpour, protected by rough wooden frames. To anyone else, it might have looked like a lonely place. To Evelyn, it was proof that she had not disappeared. She slipped inside, locked the door, and set the lantern on the kitchen table. The familiar room glowed amber around her. Bundles of herbs hung from the rafters. Jars of dried beans and salt lined the shelves. Her fishing knife rested beside the cutting board, and a stack of split firewood waited near the iron stove. Evelyn moved through the room with practiced care. She checked the windows. She filled a canvas bag with water, dried fish, a wool blanket, and the small tin of medicine she kept for fever or cuts. Then she lifted the corner rug and opened the trapdoor beneath the table. Cool air rose from the hidden passage below. It led through a narrow tunnel of roots and stone, then out to a hollow behind the ridge where no one could see the cabin from the shore. She had built it after her second winter, when she finally understood that survival was not only about food and shelter. It was about having somewhere to go when the world remembered you existed. Her pendant warmed again. Evelyn froze with one hand on the trapdoor. The silver crescent had belonged to her mother. It was the only thing Evelyn had carried from the mainland, tucked beneath her shirt the day she was taken away. She pulled it free. The metal was bright against her wet skin, and at its center was a tiny mark she had never understood, a crescent moon crossed by a thin line. Outside, thunder rolled across the island. Then came a knock. Not loud, not demanding. 3 slow taps against the cabin door. Evelyn reached for the fishing knife, holding it low at her side. "Who are you?" she called. For several seconds, there was only rain. Then the man outside answered, his voice deeper now, close enough that she could hear the strain beneath it. "Someone who has been looking for you." Evelyn's grip tightened. No one looks for people they abandoned. The silence that followed felt different. Not empty. Wounded. "You are right," he said at last. "But I did not know you were here." Evelyn stepped toward the window and lifted the edge of the curtain. Through the rain, she saw a man standing beneath the crooked awning. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and soaked through a dark coat that looked far too fine for the island. His black hair clung to his forehead. He held no weapon. One hand rested against the doorframe for balance, and the other was pressed to his side, as if the storm had taken more from him than he wanted to admit. Even in the dim light, Evelyn saw the silver wolf emblem at his collar. Her heart began to pound. The stranger looked directly toward the window, though he could not possibly see her through the dark glass. "Evelyn Carter," he said softly. "Please open the door. The people who sent me are not the only ones coming." Evelyn kept the knife at her side and watched the stranger through the narrow gap in the curtain. Rain ran from his coat in dark lines, pooling at his boots. He looked exhausted, but not helpless. There was a steadiness in the way he stood beneath the awning, even with one hand pressed against his side. The silver wolf emblem at his collar caught the lantern light from inside the cabin, and Evelyn felt the old story she had heard as a child rise in her memory. The royal crest belonged to one man alone, King Mason Blackwood. She had seen his face once in a faded newspaper that washed ashore in a broken crate 5 years earlier. He had been younger then, standing on the steps of the citadel with a solemn expression and a crown of silver resting against dark hair. The man outside her door had the same black hair, the same gray eyes. But kings did not stand in storms outside forgotten cabins. Kings did not call abandoned girls by name. "Who sent you?" Evelyn asked. Mason did not answer immediately. His gaze lowered to the wet porch boards. "A council order brought my ship here," he said. "But I came because I found something that led me to you." Evelyn looked at the pendant in her hand. It was still warm, almost hot now. "What did you find?" "A locked box beneath the old royal archive." His voice was quiet, careful. "It carried your scent." Evelyn almost laughed, but the sound never came. "My scent. Cedar, rainwater, and wild mint." He lifted his eyes to hers through the window. "I followed it across half the kingdom." The storm flashed white beyond the trees. Evelyn saw the truth in his face, or at least something close enough to truth that it unsettled her. She had spent 10 years learning not to trust a kind voice. Kind voices had told her she would be safe while they pushed her toward a boat. Kind voices had promised her food and blankets, then sailed away before sunset. "You should leave," she said. "This island does not want visitors." Mason's mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. "I have noticed." A gust of wind shook the cabin walls. Mason caught himself against the doorframe, and Evelyn saw his shoulders tighten. He was injured, though he was trying to hide it. Her eyes moved to the dark stain spreading through the side of his coat, then back to his face. She did not need to know him to recognize someone fighting to remain standing. The part of her that had survived Ashfall did not like strangers. The part of her that had survived because she helped injured birds, stranded seals, and even foolish fishermen who drifted too close to the rocks could not ignore him either. "Step back from the door," she said. Mason obeyed at once. Evelyn unlocked the cabin, opened it only wide enough for him to enter, and pointed toward the wooden chair beside the stove. "Sit there. Do not touch anything." He stepped inside slowly, bringing cold rain and the scent of cedarwood with him. The cabin suddenly felt smaller. Mason looked around at the shelves, the herbs, the patched walls, and the firewood stacked with care. His expression changed as he noticed the small marks carved into the beam above the stove. 10 rows of short lines, one for every season Evelyn had survived. "You built all this," he said. "I had time," she replied. She set the knife on the table within reach, then pulled a clean cloth and a jar of salve from the medicine shelf. "Take off the coat." Mason hesitated. "You do not trust me." "No, then why help me?" Evelyn met his eyes. "Because I know what it feels like when no one does." For the first time since he arrived, the king looked away. Outside, beyond the roar of the storm, another horn sounded from the water. Lower. Closer. Mason's face hardened. "That is not my ship," he said. Evelyn listened. Through the rain and the waves, she heard the distant creak of oars moving toward Ashfall's forbidden shore. Mason did not need to explain the sound. Evelyn had lived on Ashfall long enough to know the difference between a fishing boat drifting too close to the rocks and a vessel that had come with purpose. The oars outside moved in measured strokes, cutting through the waves beneath the storm. More than one boat. More than one person. She set the jar of salve on the table and crossed to the window. Far below the ridge, dim lanterns bobbed across the black water. Their light was covered and uncovered in a pattern, 3 flashes, then 2. A signal. Mason rose from the chair too quickly, one hand returning to his side. "You need to use the passage," he said. "Take your supplies and go." Evelyn turned toward him. "You just arrived." That is why they followed. His voice was calm, but urgency tightened every word. "They were not supposed to know I found you." Evelyn looked at the royal emblem on his collar. "Who are they?" Mason hesitated. The pause told her more than an answer would have. "Men working for Chancellor Holloway." The name moved through the cabin like cold air. Evelyn had not heard it spoken aloud in 10 years. She remembered a tall man in a gray coat standing on the deck of the ship that left her here. She remembered his polished boots, his careful voice, and the way he had called her a risk instead of a child. Her fingers closed around the silver pendant. "He sent you too." "He sent a royal search party," Mason said. "He did not send me." Evelyn studied him. "Why would the Chancellor want me after all this time?" Mason glanced at the pendant around her neck. "Because the box in the archive contained your family name. Because someone has been hiding records about Ashfall. And because Holloway has spent years making sure no one asks why a 14-year-old girl was abandoned here." The lanterns below grew closer. Evelyn could see dark figures stepping from a longboat onto the narrow strip of sand. They carried covered lamps and wore gray weather cloaks. No royal silver. No wolf crest. "They will find the cabin," she said. "Eventually," Mason replied. "But not tonight, if you know this island as well as I think you do." The word should have sounded like praise. Instead, they made something ache inside her. No one had ever looked at her life on Ashfall and seen skill before. They had seen punishment. They had seen a warning. Mason looked around the cabin again, at the rain barrels, the herbs, the neatly stacked wood, and the maps Evelyn had drawn by hand. "You made a home where they expected you to disappear," he said. Evelyn held his gaze. "I did not have another choice." "You did," Mason said quietly. "You chose to keep going." For a second, the storm seemed farther away. Then a beam of light swept across the cabin wall. Evelyn moved at once. She grabbed the canvas bag from the table, shoved in the medicine tin, dried fish, and the folded map of the island. She took the lantern but covered its flame with her palm. Mason reached for his coat, but Evelyn caught his wrist. "You cannot follow through the root passage like that." "I can manage." "You can barely stand." His expression sharpened. Pride rising before pain pushed it aside. Evelyn pulled a wool scarf from a hook and wrapped it firmly around his side over the torn shirt. using the cloth to hold the bandage in place. Her hands were steady even when his breath caught. "You are going to listen to me," she said. "On this island, I know what keeps people alive." Mason looked down at her, rainwater still shining in his dark hair. "All right," he said. Outside, a voice called from the trees. "Evelyn Carter, by order of Chancellor Holloway, open the door." Evelyn blew out the lantern. Darkness swallowed the cabin. She lifted the trapdoor beneath the table, and cold air rose from below. Mason stood beside her, silent now. Together, they disappeared into the hidden passage just as the first hard knock struck the cabin door. The passage beneath the cabin was barely wide enough for Evelyn to move through without lowering her head. Roots twisted across the packed earth like dark fingers, and water dripped steadily from the stones above them. She led the way with one hand against the wall and the other gripping the canvas bag. Behind her, Mason followed in silence, though she could hear the strain in his breathing whenever the tunnel narrowed. The first knock at the cabin door came again, muffled by the earth. Then another voice called her name. Evelyn did not stop. She had dug this passage during her third winter on Ashfall, after a fallen tree trapped her inside the cabin for 2 days. Back then, she had told herself it was only practical. But the truth was simpler. Some part of her had always believed the people who abandoned her might return. The tunnel opened behind a curtain of hanging roots on the far side of the ridge. Rain struck Evelyn's face as she stepped into the night. The hollow beyond was hidden by boulders and thick ferns, invisible from the shore and the cabin path. She crouched beneath the low stone ledge and motioned for Mason to do the same. From there, they could see the dim outline of her cabin through the trees. Gray-cloaked men moved around it with covered lanterns. One stood at the door, reading from a paper that the rain had already begun to blur. By order of Chancellor Grant Holloway, he called, "Evelyn Carter is required to return to the mainland for questioning." Evelyn felt no surprise. Only the old ache beneath her ribs, the one that had never fully left after the boat sailed away. Questioning. They had used that word before. It had sounded harmless when she was 14. Mason watched the cabin with a hard, unreadable expression. "They are lying," he said. "I know. If they wanted answers, they would have brought royal guards." Evelyn looked at him. "And if they wanted to help, they would not have come in the middle of a storm." For a moment, Mason said nothing. Rain ran down his face, and his dark coat was still soaked through despite the shelter of the ledge. Evelyn noticed his hand pressing against the scarf around his side. The cloth had begun to darken again, though not badly. She opened the medicine tin and took out a small bottle of willow bark drops. "Drink this," she said. Mason looked at it, then at her. "What is it?" "Something for pain. It will not make you sleep." "You are certain?" Evelyn held his gaze. "I do not give people drinks without telling them what they are." Something changed in his expression. Regret, perhaps, or understanding. He accepted the bottle and drank without another question. Below them, the men searched the cabin. One lifted the rug. Another checked the rain barrels. Evelyn's hands curled into fists. Every shelf, every herb bundle, every mark she had carved into the wood was hers. She had made that place from nothing. Watching strangers move through it felt like watching someone open a wound she had spent years closing. Mason noticed. "We can go back when they leave," he said. Evelyn shook her head. "They will come back. Then we will make sure they cannot find you again." She almost laughed at that. He spoke as if safety were something he could order into existence. But when she looked at him, she saw no arrogance. Only a man who had arrived too late and knew it. A shout rose from the cabin. One of the men had found the open trapdoor. Mason's shoulders tightened. "They know." Evelyn glanced toward the forest. The rain had softened the ground, but the trail to the sea caves would still hold if they moved carefully. Beyond the caves was the old lighthouse path, and beyond that, the place her mother had once marked on a scrap of cloth hidden inside Evelyn's pendant. She had never gone there. Not in 10 years. "There is somewhere else," Evelyn said. Mason turned toward her. "Where?" She looked toward the dark line of cliffs, where waves burst white against the rocks. "A place the island has been trying to lead me to since the day I arrived." Behind them, the cabin door swung open. Lantern light spilled across the rain. Evelyn rose from the hollow, tightened the strap of her bag, and began walking toward the forbidden side of Ashfall. Evelyn moved through the forest without looking back. The path toward the forbidden side of Ashfall was not marked by stones or branches. It lived in her memory, in the way the ground tilted beneath her boots, and the way the wind changed when she passed the old cedar grove. Mason followed close behind, quieter now that the willow bark had eased the sharpness of his pain. The gray-cloaked men were still at the cabin, but their lanterns flashed between the trees often enough to remind Evelyn that the island was no longer hers alone. "How far?" Mason asked. "About a mile," she said. "Maybe more in this rain." He nodded, then glanced at the narrow trail ahead. "You have walked this before." "Not all the way." Evelyn pushed aside a dripping branch. "My mother left a map hidden inside my pendant. It points toward the cliffs." Mason's expression changed. "Your mother knew about this place?" "I do not know what she knew." The answer came out sharper than she intended. Evelyn slowed near a patch of white mushrooms growing beside a fallen log. She had spent years imagining her mother's face, trying to remember the sound of her voice before the officials came. Some memories stayed clear. Her mother brushing Evelyn's hair beside a kitchen window, her hand slipping the silver pendant around Evelyn's neck. Her whisper at the dock, "Follow the moon if they ever come for you again." Evelyn had been too young to understand. For 10 years, she had been too afraid to try. They reached the edge of the cedar grove, where the land dropped toward the sea. Ahead, the forbidden side of Ashfall rose in jagged cliffs, black against the pale foam below. A narrow path curved along the rock face, half hidden by tall grass and mist. At the far end stood the remains of an old lighthouse, its stone tower broken near the top, but still watching the water. Mason stopped beside her. "The royal maps call this coast unstable. That is why no one comes here," Evelyn said. "The ground is solid if you stay close to the wall, and do not step where the grass is too bright." Mason looked at the trail, then at her. "You know every danger on this island." Evelyn kept her eyes on the lighthouse. "I had to learn." His voice softened. "You should not have had to." The words reached something in her that had been locked away for years. She did not answer. Instead, she started down the path. The wind pulled at her sweater and filled the air with salt. Below them, waves rolled against the rocks in long white lines. Mason stayed close enough to help if she slipped, but he did not try to take control. When the trail narrowed, Evelyn held up a hand. "Wait." She crouched and brushed aside wet grass near the cliff wall. Beneath it, a small iron ring was set into the stone. The same crescent symbol from her pendant was carved beside it. Her heart began to beat faster. Mason knelt beside her, his silver-gray eyes fixed on the mark. "That symbol was on the box in the Royal Archive," he said. Evelyn removed her pendant and pressed it against the carved crescent. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stone beneath the iron ring gave a quiet click. A narrow door opened in the cliff, revealing darkness beyond and a faint, warm glow far inside. The scent that drifted out was not damp stone or sea salt. It was cedar wood, wild mint, and something older, like paper kept safe for years. Mason looked at Evelyn, stunned. "Your scent opened it." Evelyn stared into the hidden passage. Behind them, a distant shout rose from the forest. The men from the cabin had found the trail. She grabbed the iron ring and pulled the stone door wider. "Then we need to find out why," she said. Mason followed her into the cliff passage. As the door closed behind them, the pendant against Evelyn's palm began to glow, and a woman's voice, soft as a memory, whispered from the darkness, "My daughter, you finally came." The stone door sealed behind them with a low scrape, shutting out the wind, the rain, and the distant voices searching the cliffs. Evelyn stood still in the darkness, one hand pressed against the pendant in her palm. It glowed faintly now, enough to show a narrow passage carved through the rock. The walls were smooth in places and rough in others, marked with shallow crescent symbols that caught the pale light. Mason stood beside her, close enough that she could hear his breathing, but he did not reach for her. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Evelyn swallowed. The voice had sounded like her mother, not exactly as she remembered it, but close enough to make her chest ache. "Yes," she said. "It called me daughter." Mason looked down the passage. There may be some kind of recording device. Evelyn almost smiled at the strange phrase coming from a king in a hidden cave. "On an island no one is supposed to visit? My family has hidden stranger things in older places." He spoke quietly, but there was regret beneath his words. Evelyn began walking. The passage sloped downward, and the warm glow grew stronger with every step. Soon the tunnel opened into a round chamber beneath the cliffs. It was larger than her cabin, with a high stone ceiling and shelves built into the walls. Glass jars filled with dried herbs stood beside old books and sealed wooden boxes. A brass lantern burned in the center of the room, though no one had tended it in years. On the far wall hung a faded map of the kingdom. Ashfall was marked with a silver crescent, and a line connected the island to the royal citadel. Evelyn stepped closer. Beneath the map was a portrait of a woman with chestnut brown hair and gray-blue eyes. She wore a simple blue dress and the same silver pendant Evelyn held in her hand. Evelyn stopped breathing. "My mother," she whispered. Mason moved beside her, his expression solemn. A small plaque beneath the portrait read, "Margaret Carter, keeper of the Moon Archive." Evelyn touched the edge of the frame. Her mother had never been a frightened woman who disappeared into silence. She had been someone important enough to have a portrait hidden beneath a forbidden island. On a stone table below the portrait rested a leather journal tied with blue ribbon. Evelyn opened it carefully. The first page held her mother's handwriting. "My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, then the people who feared the truth have failed to keep you hidden forever." Evelyn's vision blurred. She read on, each word pulling her deeper into a past she had never been allowed to know. Her mother wrote that Ashfall was not a prison. It was a sanctuary built generations ago to protect the Moon Archive, a collection of records proving which families had served the crown honestly and which had stolen power through lies. Margaret had discovered that Chancellor Holloway was changing succession records and hiding evidence that belonged to Evelyn's father. When Holloway learned she knew, he used Evelyn's rare scent as an excuse to exile them both. "My father?" Evelyn asked, looking at Mason. "What does that mean?" Mason found another document on the table, sealed with the royal crest. He opened it slowly, then his face tightened. "Your father was Daniel Carter," he said. "He was the royal archivist before Holloway." Evelyn shook her head. "My mother told me he died when I was little." "He did," Mason said softly. "But this says he died after reporting missing records to the council." The chamber felt suddenly smaller. Evelyn stared at the journal in her hands. Her whole life had been shaped by a story that had never been true. She had not been sent away because she was dangerous. She had been sent away because she was evidence. A sound came from the far end of the chamber. A soft mechanical click. One of the wooden boxes opened by itself. Inside lay a smaller silver case engraved with the royal wolf crest. Mason reached toward it, but Evelyn's pendant flared bright. The case opened before his fingers touched it. Inside was a single folded letter addressed to King Mason Blackwood. Mason read the first line, and the color drained from his face. "It says Holloway did not act alone," he whispered. Then the hidden chamber lights flickered, and from somewhere beyond the sealed stone door came the unmistakable sound of someone turning a key. The key turned once, slowly, on the other side of the stone door. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her mother's journal. Mason folded the letter from the silver case and slipped it inside his coat, but his face remained pale beneath the warm lantern light. "What does it say?" Evelyn asked. He looked at the sealed door. "Not here." The answer made her anger rise. 10 years alone had taught her that silence was often another kind of lie. "You came to my island with half a truth," she said. "Do not start giving me the other half now." Mason met her eyes. For a moment, the chamber held only the soft hum of the lantern and the distant scrape of metal against stone. Then he drew the letter back out. "It says Chancellor Holloway had help from someone inside my family," he said. "Someone with access to the royal archive, the council records, and the order that sent you here." Evelyn looked at the royal wolf crest on the paper. "Who?" Mason's jaw tightened. "My uncle, Lord Adrian Blackwood." The name meant little to Evelyn, but the pain in Mason's voice did not. "He was the king before my father," Mason continued. "After my father died, Adrian was supposed to guide the council until I was old enough to rule. He taught me that the crown survives by keeping secrets." He looked toward the portrait of Margaret Carter. "I thought he meant political secrets. I did not know he meant this." Another turn of the key echoed through the chamber. The stone door did not open, but dust drifted from the ceiling. Evelyn moved to the far wall where the map of Ashfall hung. Beneath it, she noticed a thin line carved into the stone, almost hidden by the frame. She pressed her fingers along the edge until she found a small crescent-shaped notch. "My mother built another way out," she said. Mason joined her. "How do you know?" Evelyn held up the pendant. The silver crescent had begun to glow again, matching the mark in the wall. Because she expected someone to find this room, she placed the pendant against the notch. A narrow panel slid aside, revealing a passage barely wide enough for one person. Cool sea air drifted from it. Mason looked back toward the sealed door. "You go first." Evelyn almost refused. She had spent too many years being told where to go. But the sound of another key turning made the choice simple. She stepped into the passage, and Mason followed close behind. The tunnel curved upward through the cliff, its floor uneven but dry. After several yards, Evelyn stopped beside a small opening in the rock. Through it, she could see the outer cove below. Gray-cloaked men had reached the lighthouse path. Their lanterns moved across the wet stones, and at the center of them stood a tall man beneath a dark umbrella. Even from a distance, Evelyn recognized the posture. Chancellor Grant Holloway had not changed. His coat was still perfectly tailored. His shoulders were still straight. He looked like a man arriving for a meeting, not someone hunting a girl he had abandoned as a child. Mason saw him too. His expression hardened. He came himself. "Why?" Evelyn asked. Mason looked at the journal in her hands. "Because he knows the archive is here." Below them, Holloway lifted his face toward the cliffs. His voice carried through the storm, calm and clear. "Evelyn Carter, I know you can hear me." Her stomach turned cold. "You have survived admirably," he called. "But you do not understand what you found. Give me the journal, and I will guarantee your safe return to the mainland." Evelyn looked at the damp pages, at her mother's handwriting, at the truth that had been buried beneath the island for years. Safe return. The same polished words. The same promise with nothing behind it. Mason watched her carefully. "You do not have to answer him." Evelyn lifted her chin. "I know." She stepped closer to the narrow opening, just enough for her voice to carry down the cliff. "You had 10 years to bring me home," she said. "You did not come for me then." Holloway's umbrella tilted slightly as he looked up. "You were a child. Decisions were made for the stability of the kingdom." Evelyn felt the fear in her chest, but she did not let it choose her words. "No. Decisions were made because you were afraid of the truth." For the first time, Holloway's calm expression broke. Mason looked at Evelyn with something close to awe. Then the pendant in her hand flashed bright, illuminating a second line of writing on the map behind them. It was a set of coordinates, followed by 6 words in Margaret Carter's handwriting. "The proof is not on the island." The words on the map changed everything. "The proof is not on the island." Evelyn read them twice, then looked at the coordinates glowing beneath her mother's handwriting. They pointed east, far beyond Ashfall, toward the mainland cliffs below Blackwood Citadel. Mason stepped closer, his shoulder brushing the rough stone wall as he studied the marks. "The old harbor tunnels," he said. "They were sealed before I became king." Evelyn looked at him. "What is there?" "A records vault beneath the council hall." His voice had gone quiet. "If your mother hid proof there, Holloway cannot destroy it without exposing himself." Below them, the Chancellor's men spread along the lighthouse path, their covered lanterns moving through rain and mist. Holloway remained beneath his umbrella, patient as ever. He did not shout again. He did not need to. He believed the island had trapped them. Evelyn knew better. The narrow passage behind them climbed toward a break in the cliff that opened above the northern cove. From there, a small rowboat lay hidden beneath a shelf of rock, tied with weathered rope. She had found it years ago and repaired it piece by piece, never knowing why she kept it ready. Now she understood. Her mother had left more than a hiding place. She had left a way forward. "My boat is on the north side," Evelyn said. "We can reach it if we move before they circle the ridge." Mason looked toward the distant water. His royal ship was still somewhere beyond the storm, but the waves had pushed it away from shore. "The crossing will be rough. I have crossed rough water before. Not with men following you." Evelyn's eyes moved to the journal held against her chest. "They have been following me for 10 years. I am done letting that decide where I go." Mason watched her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Tell me what you need." The question stopped her. "Not what should we do? Not stay behind me. What do you need?" Evelyn tightened the strap of her canvas bag. "You will carry the lantern when we reach the boat. You will not light it unless I tell you. And when I say duck, you duck." A small, unexpected smile touched Mason's face. "Understood." They moved through the hidden passage until it opened onto a narrow ledge above the northern cove. Rain swept sideways across the cliff, turning the world silver and gray. Evelyn went first, keeping one hand against the rock wall and counting each careful step. Behind them, the stone door to the archive groaned open. Holloway's men had found their way inside. A faint echo carried through the tunnel. "Search every passage," someone called. Mason looked back, but Evelyn caught his sleeve. "No," he turned to her. "They are close. Then do not give them time." They reached the cove just as a flash of lightning revealed the rowboat below. It was small, painted dark blue, with 2 oars tucked beneath its seats. Evelyn scrambled down the last slope, untied the rope, and pushed the boat toward the water. Mason steadied it while she climbed in. The waves lifted the hull hard against the rocks, but Evelyn kept her grip on the side. "Get in," she said. Mason hesitated only long enough to look up at the cliffs. Holloway had appeared on the ledge above them. His umbrella was gone now, and rain darkened his gray coat. "Evelyn," he called, "you do not know what waits for you on the mainland." She looked up at him. For years, those words would have made her afraid. But the island had taught her something Holloway never understood. Fear was not a cage unless she stayed inside it. "Neither do you," she said. Mason climbed into the boat, and Evelyn took the first oar. Together, they pushed away from Ashfall as the storm opened around them. The island grew smaller behind them, dark and silent beneath the clouds. Then Evelyn's pendant warmed once more. Inside the journal, a page she had not seen before loosened and fell into her lap. On it, in her mother's handwriting, were 7 words that made Mason go still. "Trust no one wearing the royal wolf crest." The warning lay across Evelyn's lap as the rowboat rose and fell between dark waves. "Trust no one wearing the royal wolf crest." Rain blurred the ink, but not enough to hide the shape of each careful letter. Mason saw it over her shoulder, and for the first time since they left Ashfall, he did not have an answer ready. The silver emblem at his collar seemed heavier now, a small polished symbol catching every flash of lightning. Evelyn looked from the page to his face. "Your mother wrote this?" he asked. "Mine." Then she believed the danger reached farther than Holloway. Evelyn folded the page and held it against her chest. The storm had pushed them away from the island, but the mainland was still a dark line on the horizon. Every pull of the oars made her arms burn. Mason took the other oar without asking, matching her rhythm as if they had practiced it before. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The sea filled the silence between them. "You knew about the box," Evelyn said at last. "You knew it carried my scent." Mason nodded. "I found it 3 weeks ago in a section of the archive no one had opened since my father's reign. It had no keyhole, no name, only the crescent symbol. And you did not tell your council." "No, why?" Mason looked toward the waves. "Because the moment I asked questions, people began telling me what I wanted to hear." Evelyn understood that. On Ashfall, the gulls never pretended to be anything but hungry. The tide never pretended it would not pull a careless person under. People were different. They could speak gently while closing every door behind you. "So you came alone," she said. "With a small crew I believed I could trust." Mason's jaw tightened. "Someone warned Holloway before we reached the island." The meaning settled between them. Someone on his ship wore the royal crest. Someone had betrayed him. A gust caught the boat and turned it sideways. Evelyn shifted her weight, steadying the hull. "Keep the bow toward that light," she said, pointing toward a faint glow near the mainland shore. "There is a fishing inlet about 2 miles south of the Citadel harbor. The larger ships will not fit there." Mason looked at her, surprised. "You know the coast?" My mother's map had more than one route. The pendant warmed beneath her sweater, as if agreeing. They rowed until the rain began to thin. Dawn had not arrived, but the clouds had lifted enough for Evelyn to see the outline of cliffs and the small lighthouse at the inlet. A narrow dock reached into the water, empty except for a weathered skiff tied at the end. Mason slowed his oar. "We should not go straight to the Citadel." "I was not planning to." Evelyn guided the boat toward the dock. "The vault is beneath the council hall, but the map shows an entrance through the old harbor tunnels." Mason studied her face. "You trust the map?" "I trust my mother more than the people who left me on an island." He accepted that without protest. When the boat touched the dock, Evelyn stepped onto the wet boards and tied the rope with hands that had learned every knot through necessity. Mason followed, moving more carefully now. The pain at his side had returned, but he kept it hidden behind a straight posture. Evelyn noticed anyway. "You need rest. After we find the vault." That was not a question. Mason looked at her, and a tired smile appeared briefly. You are very used to being obeyed on Ashfall. It is easier when there is no one else around. They moved along the narrow path beneath the cliffs, keeping away from the main road. Ahead, the old harbor tunnel opened beneath a stone arch half covered in ivy. Above it, carved into the wall, was the royal wolf crest. Evelyn stopped. The warning in her pocket seemed to grow colder. Mason reached toward the arch, then paused. We can turn back, he said. Evelyn looked at the dark entrance. 10 years ago, she had been carried away from the mainland without a choice. Tonight, she had returned with one. No, she said. We came this far to find the truth. She stepped beneath the crest. Deep inside the tunnel, a lantern flickered to life before them. Then a familiar voice drifted from the darkness. I was beginning to wonder whether you would read the note. The voice came from beyond the lantern glow, smooth and familiar in the way polished stone was familiar, cold, controlled, impossible to mistake. Evelyn stopped beneath the archway. Mason stepped slightly in front of her, though he did not block her view. From the shadows emerged Lord Adrian Blackwood, dressed in a dark travel coat with the royal wolf crest pinned at his throat. His silver hair was dry despite the rain outside, and his gray eyes settled first on Mason, then on Evelyn's pendant. Uncle, Mason said. The word carried no warmth. Adrian's mouth curved into something almost kind. Nephew, you look tired. Evelyn felt Mason's body go still beside her. You wrote the note, he said. Your mother wrote it, Adrian replied. I merely made certain it reached the person who needed to see it. He lifted a lantern, and its light revealed the tunnel behind him. Old brick walls stretched toward a locked iron gate. Beyond the gate stood shelves of leather-bound ledgers, sealed boxes, and metal cabinets coated in dust. The records vault. Evelyn's heart beat hard against her ribs. Why bring us here, she asked. Adrian studied her with an expression that made her feel like a page he had already read. Because your mother was right about one thing. The truth belongs to you. Mason turned toward him. You helped Holloway exile her. Adrian did not deny it. I allowed a council decision to stand. She was 14, and the kingdom was unstable. Adrian's tone never changed. Your father had just died. Holloway was gaining influence. Margaret Carter had documents that could have started a civil crisis. Evelyn's hands clenched around the journal. So you left me on Ashfall. I made sure you were sent somewhere no one could reach you. The words were meant to sound like mercy. Evelyn heard the hollow space inside them. You could have come back, she said. You could have told me who I was. Adrian's gaze softened by only a fraction. There are choices a ruler makes that cannot be explained to a child. Mason's voice sharpened. Do not speak to her as if she is still one. Adrian looked at his nephew. You are beginning to understand why I made those choices. The tunnel fell quiet. Rainwater tapped softly from the arch behind them. Evelyn looked through the iron gate at the vault. 10 years of questions stood on the other side of it. Her father's name. Her mother's fear. The reason Chancellor Holloway had returned for her now. Open it, she said. Adrian raised an eyebrow. You believe the answers will make you happy? No, Evelyn replied. But I believe they are mine. For the first time, Adrian seemed to respect her. He took a key from his coat and unlocked the gate. The iron bars swung inward with a low groan. Inside, the air smelled of dust, salt, and old paper. Evelyn walked past the shelves until she found a wooden cabinet marked with the crescent symbol. Her pendant warmed as she touched it. The drawer opened easily. Inside lay a thick folder bearing her father's name, Daniel Carter, and beneath it, a sealed envelope addressed in her mother's handwriting. For Evelyn, when she is safe enough to choose. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The letter was short. It said that Daniel Carter had discovered Holloway was selling access to royal trade routes and altering council records. It said Adrian had learned of the scheme but refused to expose it because doing so would damage the crown. It said Holloway had threatened to destroy the archive and blame Mason's family unless Margaret disappeared. At the bottom, one final sentence waited in faded ink. The man who can prove everything is still alive. Evelyn looked up. My father is alive. Adrian's face lost its calm. Mason turned sharply toward him. You told us he died. Before Adrian could answer, a heavy door at the far end of the vault opened. Chancellor Holloway stepped inside, rain darkening his gray coat, with several silent council guards behind him. He looked at the letter in Evelyn's hand and smiled without warmth. That is the trouble with old records, he said. They always invite someone to misread the past. Holloway's smile did not reach his eyes. He stood beneath the vault's harsh lantern light with his hands folded neatly in front of him, as if he had arrived for a council meeting instead of a confrontation built from 20 years of buried truth. The guards behind him wore gray uniforms without the royal wolf crest. Evelyn noticed that first. Mason noticed it too. "You brought private guards into a royal vault," Mason said. Holloway gave a small shrug. "I brought men who understand discretion." Adrian stepped forward, but his confidence had faded. "Grant, this has gone far enough." Holloway turned toward him. "You lost the right to say that when you allowed the Carter girl to live." Evelyn held her father's file close. The words landed harder than any storm wind. Not because they frightened her, because they made the truth plain. She had never been a mistake. She had been a problem Holloway failed to erase. Mason moved beside her, his voice low and steady. "You will answer for what you did." Holloway looked at him with practiced disappointment. "You are still young enough to think answers repair a kingdom." He pointed toward the folder in Evelyn's arms. "Those records will not save anyone. They will tear apart the council, expose old loyalties, and turn every pack leader against the crown." "Then the crown should have been honest," Evelyn said. Holloway's eyes shifted to her. For the first time, he seemed to truly see her. Not the frightened 14-year-old on a ship. Not a name in a sealed order. A woman who had crossed the sea carrying the evidence he feared. "You have your mother's stubbornness," he said. She believed truth was enough. Evelyn remembered the cabin on Ashfall, the marks above the stove, the years when no one had come. She believed I deserved to know it. Mason reached into his coat and drew out the letter from the Moon Archive. "This names Adrian's role and your partnership with him," he said. Adrian's face tightened. Holloway barely glanced at the letter. "A letter can be questioned. A journal can be dismissed. And your father, Evelyn, has been hidden so long that no council will trust his word." Evelyn looked at Adrian. "Where is he?" Adrian did not answer. Mason's expression changed, sharp and cold. "You know," Adrian lowered his gaze. "There is an old lighthouse station north of the Citadel. It was converted into a private residence after the war. Daniel Carter has been kept there under another name." Holloway's calm finally cracked. "You should have stayed silent." Adrian looked at Evelyn, and for the first time, regret appeared without disguise. "I thought keeping him alive was the least I could do." Evelyn's throat tightened. It was not enough. It could never be enough. But it was a direction, a real place, a real chance. Holloway took one step toward the folder. "Give me the records, Evelyn. You can leave this city. You can have land, money, a new name. No one will ever trouble you again." The offer sounded almost gentle. That was what made it ugly. Evelyn thought of the island, of rain barrels and cedar trees, of teaching herself to survive because powerful men had decided her life was easier to hide than to protect. She placed the folder on the stone table, then laid her mother's journal beside it. "I do not want a new name," she said. "I want the one you tried to take from me." Mason stood at her side, but he did not speak for her. He only looked toward the guards. "You serve the crown," he said, "not the chancellor. Look at the records. Look at the orders signed in your names." One guard stepped forward, uncertain. Evelyn opened the folder to a page stamped with Holloway's seal. It listed false charges, altered dates, and a payment record connected to the ship that took her to Ashfall. The guard read it slowly. Another moved closer. Holloway's voice hardened. "Do not be foolish. You are sworn to order." "Order is not the same as silence," Mason said. The first guard removed the gray insignia from his coat and placed it on the table. Then he turned to Holloway. "You will come with us to the council chamber." Holloway looked around the vault, searching for the obedience he had always expected. He found none. His shoulders lowered by a fraction. Adrian stepped away from him. Mason gathered the records, then looked at Evelyn. "The council can wait until morning," he said. "Your father cannot." Evelyn held the pendant her mother had given her. Beyond the vault, dawn was beginning to pale the harbor sky. For the first time in 10 years, the mainland did not feel like the place where she had been abandoned. It felt like the road leading to someone who had been waiting for her. By the time Evelyn reached the old lighthouse station, the storm had passed. Morning light spread across the cliffs in thin bands of gold, touching the wet grass and the slate roof of the small stone house. It looked peaceful from the outside, almost gentle. Evelyn knew better now. Some places hid their cruelty behind quiet windows and clean walls. Mason walked beside her, his coat still damp at the edges, his steps slower than before, but steady. He had offered to send guards ahead. Evelyn had refused. She did not want another group of strangers entering this moment before she could. At the front door, she stopped with her hand raised but not yet touching the wood. The pendant beneath her sweater felt warm. For 10 years, she had wondered whether her father had forgotten her. She had wondered if he had chosen silence. She had wondered if the story of his death was kinder than the truth. Mason stood a few feet away, giving her space. "You do not have to do this alone," he said. Evelyn looked at the door. "I have done enough alone." She knocked. The sound was small against the sea wind. Nothing happened at first. Then footsteps crossed the floor inside, slow and careful. The door opened. An older man stood there with silver beginning at his temples and tired gray-blue eyes that matched her own. He wore a simple brown sweater and held a book against his chest, as if it had been interrupted in the middle of a thought. He looked at Evelyn once, then again. The book slipped from his hand. "Margaret," he whispered. Evelyn felt her throat close. "No," she said softly. "Evelyn." The man's face changed. Years seemed to fall away and return at the same time. He reached for the doorframe, as if he needed it to remain standing. "My little star," he said. Evelyn had not heard that name since she was 14. She stepped inside before fear could tell her to run. Her father did not rush toward her. He waited, trembling, until she nodded. Then he wrapped his arms around her with a gentleness that made her remember a kitchen window, a warm coat, and someone lifting her onto his shoulders so she could see the first snow of winter. Evelyn held him tightly. She did not forgive the lost years in that moment. She did not understand all the choices that had been made around her, but she let herself be found. Later, they sat near the window while Daniel Carter told her what Holloway and Adrian had done. He had been hidden under another name after refusing to sign false archive records. He had searched for news of Evelyn through every safe channel he could find, but each message had been stopped before it reached Ashfall. He had never stopped believing she was alive. Evelyn listened with her mother's journal in her lap, and Mason standing quietly near the fireplace. When Daniel finally looked at the king, his eyes filled with old caution. "Can she trust you?" he asked. Mason did not answer quickly. He looked at Evelyn first. "That is not mine to decide," he said. Evelyn felt the weight of the words settle differently than every promise she had heard before. Mason was not asking her to forget the island. He was not asking her to become someone else. He was leaving the choice in her hands. Outside, the sun climbed higher over the sea. By noon, the council would hear the records. Holloway would face the truth he had buried, and Adrian would answer for the silence he had chosen. But for one quiet hour, Evelyn sat between the father she had been told was gone and the man who had crossed a forbidden sea to find her. She touched the silver pendant at her throat. The crescent had stopped glowing, but when she opened the journal, a final page stirred in the breeze. Beneath her mother's signature were 7 words written in fresh, dark ink. "The next door opens when you choose."